Number 1 on page 351, it's a 3-step proof. Same procedure, but you'll find that what we couldn't do before with just 2 steps, we can with additional steps. You'll see it in this one, I think, the very first one. Also, sometimes as we figure these out from last step to first step, thus far it's been like a linear sequence when we reproduce it as the proof. That's not always the case. Sometimes, for example, 2 things need to be accomplished in no particular order. Or sometimes we determine what needs to be accomplished, but it can't be done yet, so we have to jump forward a bit and make the determination on how we're going to get that step that we're already sure has to happen. You'll see it in the first few. I'll bring it up again for you. Let's look over our premises and see what we have to work with. First premise is a wedge. Well, there are 2 argument forms or rules of inference that use wedges. Disjunctive syllogism. If that's the premise of disjunctive syllogism, the first premise, we're going to extract B horseshoe A. Agreed? Yeah. That could be the second premise of constructive dilemma. It's the only other occasion that we use a wedge. If you have the second premise of constructive dilemma, there's no telling what the conclusion is going to be. You just don't have enough information. So I'm betting if line 1 is going to be used, it's either for disjunctive syllogism or constructive dilemma. Our second premise is a dot. We only have 1 rule of inference that uses a dot or a conjunction as a premise. And that is? No. Simplification. So what would our conclusion be if that's the premise of simplification? No. Curl A. We'd have curl A right now if we wanted it. Your conclusion is a negation, a curl that does not exist in the premises. So you all should know what the last step of the proof has to be right now, because there's only one way to create a curl. Modus tollens. Go ahead and draw it up, everything you know about it. That's what you should have drawn up, right? Well, we had some question during the break about our numerical notation, the numbering of these premises, or the conclusions. So I'm going to try to point out where we're getting them from. This is the last step of the proof. So it's number 5, because that is the last step of the proof. In this case, we're not sure about the numbers of those yet, because we don't have either of them on a line by itself. See, if one of those existed on a line by itself, then we would put the number of that line. But we don't know at this point. Again, we have two partial premises. No telling what that is. This has more information for us to go on. So we're looking for a horseshoe whose antecedent is B. We have a horseshoe whose antecedent is B. It's in line 1. I know it's not on the line by itself, as has been the case probably every time up to this point. It doesn't matter. It's a 3-step proof. We're going to assume that B horseshoe A is that first premise. It's an assumption. But on that assumption, we know what the second premise has to be. Exactly. Curl A. So let's take out that variable. Put in A. Still don't know what numbers to put there because we don't have either of those on a line by itself. But I think we know how to get either one, or both of them, don't we? Because when we looked over our premises prior to the proof procedure, we anticipated both of those. So again, I have to emphasize how important it is to look over your premises and anticipate what you could do with them. We said we could extract B horseshoe A by disjunctive syllogism. We said we could simplify curl A out of line 2. And it turns out that's what's going to happen. Let's see which one of those has to be done first. Or why don't you go ahead and finish off your steps over here, and we'll figure out which one has to be done first, and we'll put our numeric notation in there when we figure that out. We need both of those. Okay, so we could have curl A right now, correct? Okay, person who's asking about our notation over there. This is how we're going to get curl A. Curl A dot C is line 2. We're going to get curl A from line 2. That's where that 2 is coming from. I check it off to notice that, or to note that it's ready to go. It exists on a line by itself. We still have to obtain B horseshoe A. And how are we going to extract B horseshoe A? Again, it's what we noticed before we even started the procedure. We were just looking at our premises and saying, I could do this, I could do that. Where are we getting B horseshoe A from?
Disjunctive syllogism.
And what line?
Line 1.
So I'm putting the 1 there because it is line 1. There's no other explanation for it. See, it's line 1. So I'm keeping track of that. That's our first premise of disjunctive syllogism. What do we need as a second premise for that disjunctive syllogism? Let me know when you figure it out. What? Oops. Let's try that again. What do we need as a second premise of disjunctive syllogism in this case? Curl A. Can we use a line of proof more than once, do you suppose?
Yes.
Yeah, use it 100 times if you want to. Now, I want you to figure out which one of these has to occur first in our actual proof. We need to extract curl A, which we could do at any time, but it has to be prior to disjunctive syllogism. Understand? Because we need curl A for the disjunctive syllogism. So here's our notation. This has to be line 3, because it has to happen first. So we'll put our 3 there. That's the first step of the proof, and that's the last step of the proof. Then line 4 must be what?
B horseshoe.
B horseshoe A. That exists. That will. And both of these will. That's line 4. We already determined that. That's going to be line 3. So, curl A. Get rid of those parentheses or it's wrong. A, our first 3-step proof. Not bad. Questions about that one? Not much you can do with a simple statement. That could only be substituted for a premise in the rules of inference that is simply P or Q. For example, the second premise of modus ponens, the only premise of addition, either premise of conjunction. So I know for a fact if line 2 is going to be used, it's for one of those 3 things. Modus ponens, conjunction, or addition. There's nothing else it can be used for. Line 1, it's just a horseshoe as far as we're concerned. So that's going to be used for modus ponens or modus tollens or hypothetical syllogism or absorption. There's a lot you could do with horseshoes. Okay, now our conclusion F exists in line 1. What's it doing there in line 1? What is it? What kind of a component is it? That's right, it's the left-hand conjunct of a dot, so you know what the last step is. You can't just yank it out of there right now, because this dot is part of a greater statement. But you know what the last step is. What is it? Simplification. Right? But obviously, 2 things have to happen prior to that. It's a 3-step proof. The last step is simplification. But that dot It's trapped in a larger statement. So you have 2 steps to get it out of there. It's the consequent of a horseshoe. How are you going to get that dot out of the horseshoe? It's the consequent of a horseshoe. How do you extract the consequent from a horseshoe? Those are the extractions over there. Modus ponens. What do you need as the second premise of that modus ponens?
D wedge E.
D wedge E. Okay, that's your proof. I can tell you guys are nowhere near familiar enough with these rules. I can't learn them for you. I'm telling you, if you take 15 or 20 minutes to learn them, the rest of this is a snap. If you don't, it's virtually impossible. Putting a 5 there because it is the last step of the proof. Line 5. Now I know for a fact that if F is line 5 and all I need for it is that premise right there, F dot G, in this case I know what line of the proof F dot G is going to be. What? Okay, maybe we don't. I don't know. But this needs to be obtained on a line by itself. We know that. It's the consequent of a horseshoe. How do we say we're getting that consequent out of the horseshoe? The only way it can be done, which is what? Modus ponens, yeah. What does your second premise of that modus ponens have to be? D wedge E. Okay, we have that. It's line 1, so that's where that number is coming from. It is line 1. Don't have that on a line by itself. It's a wedge that doesn't exist. It's going to have to be created. 2 ways to create a wedge: constructive dilemma and addition. What do you want to try? If that's the conclusion of addition, what do we need as a premise? Do we have D on the line by itself? What line is it? So that's where that 2 is coming from. This has to happen first because we need it for modus ponens. And we need modus ponens for this, right? So what line do you think D wedge E is going to be in our proof? 3, 4, or 5? 3. It's the first thing that has to be done, right? And what line do you think F dot G is going to be? It'll be waiting for us when we get back to the future. right. Second three-step proof. There you have it. Questions about that one? Number 3. Okay, that first premise, you should be anticipating either simplification, in which case we would extract H horseshoe I, right? Or constructed dilemma, in which case we would create what? Well, we know more than that. We know exactly what the wedge is. Figure it out. Let me know when you get it. I wedge J, which, by the way, happens to be the conclusion we're after. That's very suspicious, if you ask me. Second premise is a dot. It's a conjunction. We only use that for simplification. So, what would we simplify from line 2? What would our conclusion be? No. What? H. Well, our conclusion, I wedge J, exists in line 2. Is there any way it's coming from line 2? By extraction? No, because it's the right-hand side of a dot. You can't touch it. That's why, you can't touch it. So it's not coming from line 2. Therefore, it has to be created. You're creating a wedge. Here we go again. It's the same 5, 6 questions over and over again, but you've got to know how to answer them. And that means knowing the rules. So you need to create a wedge. There's 2 ways to do that. 2 ways to do it. Maybe both will work, maybe not. Maybe both will work, but one's too many steps. Maybe only one will work. But you need to try them. If we try addition as a last step, we need I as a premise. I'm sure you'll agree. I exists in 2 places. Maybe we can get it out of one of those places. In this case, it's not coming out of line 2 for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's the wrong side of a wedge. You can't touch the left-hand disjunct of a wedge. And anyway, that wedge is on the wrong side of a dot. So I is not coming out of line 2. In the first premise, I is the consequent of a horseshoe. It can be extracted by modus ponens, but not while that horseshoe is part of the dot. But we can simplify it out of that dot. Our second premise would have to be H. H exists in three places. It's not coming out of either of those, at least for the reason that it's the antecedent of a horseshoe. Here, we could simplify it out of that dot. Aha, for our modus ponens. So, simplify, modus ponens, addition. Well, that's 4 steps. So addition is not going to work for us. Therefore, the last step must be therefore, the last step is, thank you, draw up your constructive dilemma the way we have been, using variables for those statements you're not sure of. We know that's going to be the last step, number 5. We know we need a conjunction of 2 horseshoes. We know we need a wedge for the second premise. We know the consequence of those horseshoes have to be the disjuncts of the conclusion, I and J respectively. Don't know about those except they have to be the same thing. Same there. So that's how you draw up your argument that you've determined must be the case. Then you look around to see what you have that resembles anything here. Well, very little information here. We do have a wedge, but it's not coming out of there, so I'm not sure that I would assume anything about that second premise. However, line 1 does resemble this in much detail. Yes? So assume line 1 is this first premise, do what we've been doing, take out your variables, put in the statements line 1 contains. That'll tell you what your second premise of constructive dilemma must be. Then you're going to have to figure out how to get that. But I think we're on the right track with this. I assume you've taken out those variables, put in H and H as per line 1. Then these variables, that's what our second premise has to look like. This exists, and I got that line 1 from line 1. It is line 1. That needs to be on a line by itself. You have 2 shots to get it. Go. Two shots to get it. Still modern compositions, classical music, same as all of our other art, stinks. Hmm? Speculate. Well, we need a wedge that doesn't exist. It's going to have to be created. It's either constructive dilemma or addition. What do you want to consider first? Yeah, it's always a good idea. Unless you have that constructive dilemma sort of staring you in the face, ready to go, I'd always try addition first. Hey, is that a good substitution for addition? Does that count? Yeah, we did that before, right? Now, does H exist on the line by itself? No, no big deal. We have another step to play with. We need to get H on a line by itself. H exists in 3 places. It's coming out of one of those. Which one? How? That's where we're getting that 2 from. It is line 2. So this is our last step. Can you tell which one of these has to happen prior to the other?
Simplification first.
Simplification has to happen first, right? Because we need H for this one. So therefore H has to be obtained first. It's therefore line 3. That's where we're getting that 3 from. So put it over here. That's going to exist when we get back to the future. What line do you think H wedge H is going to be? If that's 3 and that's 5, there you go. It'll exist for us waiting when we get back to the future, and there's our proof. Are we getting the hang? You? Yeah? No, you. You. Questions? Onward. See if 4 is in the back of the book or not. It is not. But I'm going to skip number 4. A lot of students find it difficult. I don't know if I want to get into it right now. We'll come back to it. 6 happens to be much easier. And we have 3 premises to play with. Did I ever use the terminology setup before? I think I did. It's my own terminology. See those premises right there? You need to recognize those immediately, just about, as the premises of one of our argument forms, one of our 9 rules of inference. Which one? Modus tollens. Tell me what we would conclude if we used them as modus tollens premises. Well, if you have the premises of modus tollens, you know what the conclusion will be. Curl R. There you go. Look at those 2 premises right there. It's another setup. Those are the premises of one of our argument forms, one of our rules of inference. Which one? Hypothetical syllogism. What would our conclusion be in that case? Q horseshoe S. So we have 2 setups going for us right now.